Hi, my name is Andy Newman, and thank you for your interest in my article, which is called Gatekeepers of the Urban Commons, Vigilant Citizenship and Neoliberal Space in Multi-Ethnic Paris. The article is based on ethnographic research conducted in the northeast part of Paris, a historically working-class area which for the last half-century is increasingly home to residents of Maghrebi and West African origin. The focus of my study was on the ways that public parks in this area had become a significant arena of social, cultural, and political contestation. The disputes over a particular park called the Jardin des Halles shed light on several topics, including how citizenship is practiced and understood in France, and more broadly, how politically spontaneous and culturally rich urban commons are both threatened and maintained by grassroots-level politics. In the article, I describe how parks in Paris are actual spatial representations of Republican citizenships in their design, but also in how their operation is planned. I show how the Jardin des Halles represents a radical departure from this approach. Specifically, it places residents with the responsibility of ensuring a successful public space, and that's a real difference from a Republican notion that the state ensures equal access to all people of a park. And I think that this is a significant political shift, even if it happens at a micro level. With regards to the case of the Jardin des Halles, I describe this built-in logic of citizenship in the park as a form of vigilant citizenship, because it is built with the expectations that residents will be vigilant and keep watch and survey public space, and that's a role that's been formally controlled by the City of Paris Parks Department. As such, I see this as a kind of neoliberal shift in which residents, and often using a language of managerialism, take over a responsibility that was formerly the domain of the state. But one thing that's interesting about this case is that, in a broad sense, France has resisted a lot of the kinds of neoliberal reforms that have been seen in places like the United Kingdom and the United States. So what you're looking at is a very kind of different configuration of neoliberal transformation or neoliberalization taking place in France, where even though it's resisted at very high levels in terms of how the state works, in little incipient ways, such as the management of parks, one can see a kind of neoliberal social transformation taking hold in very gradual ways. Many of the residents who get involved in kind of negotiations with the municipal authorities over the design and operation of public parks, or get involved with park activism, for lack of a better word, disproportionately represent the middle class element of the neighborhood, and in particular people who are teachers and public sector employees. The interesting thing about these residents, though, is that they're not necessarily naive about the politics of what's going on. They aren't just appendages of a kind of neoliberal body politic or architectural design, and often they very delicately weigh the desires or even pressure on them that comes from public authorities and politicians against the sort of importance of making sure that the park is an inclusive space for people from across the neighborhood and people of all ethnic backgrounds and class backgrounds. An important thing to underline is that the residents who are involved in these negotiations with municipal authorities and elected officials are activists who are very much invested in preserving a kind of diverse, dynamic urban commons, while at the same time being implicated in a kind of management scheme in which they take over the aspect of running a public space from the city. The metaphor of the gatekeeper is a very important one to understand for my argument. Gatekeepers are figures that often have a great deal of discretionary power in a limited way. That is, they can grant you access to something or deny you access to it, but often they don't have a lot of power in a larger political structure. In the same way, residents who, as activists, get involved in kind of vigilant citizenship find that their own right to the city rests on their willingness and capacity to survey their neighbors. My ethnographic observations show that residents can direct vigilance against their neighbors, but a lot of the vigilance is actually marshaled on behalf of residents. And in fact, it becomes an important way that a vibrant urban commons is actually maintained and reproduced by residents. As far as the broader implications of this article go, I guess I'll just finish up with a kind of brief observation. If you went to the Jardin right now and took a stroll down the Esplanade, you'd probably find a lot of the things that conform to most people's definitions of successful urban public space or vibrant urban commons. That is, you'd find social diversity, you'd find artistic and cultural expression, you'd probably find political activity of some kind. And a lot of this continues to happen because of the hard work of residents who want to see it that way. In other words, it doesn't just happen naturally or by accident, even if there's a degree of spontaneity involved. And for me, that teaches us a really valuable lesson, which is despite all the big shifts that are happening in cities around the world and gentrification and neoliberal form, at the end of the day, residents at a block by block level who are really engaged in their communities have a huge amount of influence, and that is not to be underestimated by anybody. And it is for those reasons that places like Northeast Paris, and there's places like this in cities everywhere, maintain a great deal of kind of cultural and political vibrancy.